Public and private in the US, and we have 1/4 of India's population. So I think India could easily have 200, 300, 400 elite educational institutions, not just the IITs and the IIMs, but IPE and the central universities and the others, which are meeting a huge need globally. And I should say, I think another opportunity for India, right? Indians spend $4 billion a year going to other countries for higher ed. I think if India gets this right, it has a potential to be the leader in higher education provision for the developing world, for people in the Middle East, in Africa, in other parts of Asia, who now go to Australia, or the US, or the UK. They could come to India and get a similar quality education at 1/3 of the price. Right? So that I think, and that also can bring new resources in to help to improve the system. So I think if they can get the model right, that there is a great opportunity. What worries me is not so much another 7 IITs, it's that other 80% who are taking people's money and delivering very little.
Thank you.
Focusing on India, emphasizing on education, but as an agrarian economy, we are not even self-sustainable today. So don't you think that we should focus more on agriculture than on higher education to get our self-sustainable agricultural field first?
Farmers understand GPS systems. They run complex food processing so that they capture more of the value. I was just talking before the talk with whether there's an opportunity in India to extend the co-op model that has worked so well in milk production and in a few other areas. Why can this not be extended across all of agriculture? And not just to produce the crops, but to store them and to turn them into higher value-added products that will increase the wealth in the villages. So I do not think that we should think of agriculture as separate from the skill system, but rather that it should be integrated into it, and that we should provide farmers in the off-season with opportunities to be in a BPO office or to have their spouse there, and ways to enhance the family's income. So that when I talk about sustainable skill systems, it is not to ignore agriculture, but to bring it to those villages in such a way that they can really thrive and still keep the aspects of the traditional life that they want.
Thank you, sir.
And which is not with Chinese. But in the recent past, Chinese have made it compulsory to have English as the medium of learning. What could be the impact of this?
I think if the Chinese can really pull it off for India, but our experience to date is that the students who come from China, even the elite students in higher ed, on the whole have far worse English language skills than their Indian counterparts. And that's actually the biggest issue we face with accepting the brightest Chinese students. Great math scores, great analytical ability, but if their English isn't sufficient, we don't teach in Chinese, right? So if they're going to benefit, they need to be at a position where they can really understand, and the way we teach is very interactive. They can't just sit there quietly and listen. They have to ask questions and engage and have a strong enough knowledge ability to be able to do that. And so it will be very interesting to see whether the government can pull this off.
Hello, sir. So far we have concentrated on the service sector, okay? But is it sustainable for India to depend wholly on the service sector? Like now, the IITs have been in India for so long time, but we didn't attain any standard benchmarks in the manufacturing and technology, okay? So what else could be done in order to develop in that area? Should we bring in more number of IITs, or we have to sophisticate the existing IITs?
Look at the gap between the supply and the demand. I think what the government has started to do and what they need to do more of, and what worked in the British example I mentioned, is to reward those institutions who add capacity, who add quality places. The fact is, for several decades, the IITs, the IIMs have been excellent, but they're a tiny fraction of the population, and they have not grown, right? They have not expanded. And so the supply of these places simply doesn't meet the demand. And so those who are ambitious, who want to move, whether those or the central universities or institutions like your own, that's where I think the government should reward those who want to meet this pressing need. And I think you're right to point to the fact that you don't want to depend only on services. I think there is a huge opportunity for India in building its own manufacturing base, not to focus so much on the low cost, low end, but to focus on ideally high quality, but relatively good value. So if you take the Tata Nano, right? If you can build a good car for $2,500, right? Most of the rest of the world cannot afford the German cars or the US cars. There is a huge market for that in India, but also in the rest of the world. And so being able, like you have done in generic pharmaceuticals, to produce good medicines at a low cost, that I think is a huge opportunity for India. And the key will be to get the quality right, to get the brand right, to build it. And you're seeing this more and more in steel, in mining, in other areas. Indian companies taking a really leading role in the world economy. And so I think there is great potential there as well.
Sir, you emphasize on vocational courses, but the people in India who treat the vocational courses different from that of fresh. And how will this work in India?
I'm not sure I
I think that this will be a success in India.
You see the same thing in the US, in the UK, in many other countries. And so the example I pointed to from the high schools in New Jersey, where we have a separate vocational education system, I think the trick is not to think about vocational, but rather to think about relevance. And so what they have done is leapfrog the general education system. They use the International Baccalaureate as the basic curriculum, and then they enhance it with teaching you to be a fine chef, or fine arts, or how to do biotech research, or how to build robotics, or how to integrate a Cisco, build an entire networked office. And so this is vocational stuff, but it's cool vocational stuff. It's like going to the IITs and entering the IT sector. And so if you show to people that what you're learning is not just book learning, it's not just theoretical, but it's linked to how you can apply it in the real world, that's something that the educational research shows us motivates better learning. And so I think the key is to tie it to people to say, what we're doing is not second class. Right? It's not something we offer because you couldn't qualify. But this is something that is a very good alternative, and they pay you far more than being an unemployed college graduate. The other thing that I think is vital is that when you build that route, you allow, as you now do in the system, that you can progress later in your career, if you wish, into Polytechnic, into the IITs. So there is a career path for those same people to advance into higher ed. Some may not choose to, but those who wish, that it's not a dead end.
I think that will be the last question. We are running short of time and we have other guests here. So I would suggest that maybe after the session is over, if some of you were still to be interested in asking some questions, we can probably meet Dr. Finegold outside the talk, right? Thank you. Thank you. Well, it was the kind of response that we had from the audience, reflects the kind of talk that we listen to till now, right? Anyway, now I have the pleasure of requesting our chief guest of the day, Mr. Bhavana IAS, come and deliver his address to the gathering.
Dr. Misraji, Professor David Finegold, S.K. Lal, Satish Ji, after hearing the chief guest and so much interaction and the answers which you received, I think we should look forward to have a nice lunch now. However, Professor David has raised certain issues in the context of India and the department which I am presently heading. It's my duty to enlighten all the audience here, as well as Professor David, that what we are doing and what we want to achieve in the long term as well as in the short term. In fact, when Dr. Misraji invited me for this occasion, I remembered one of the pros which he used to tell us before starting the principles of economics in the University of Rajasthan, where I was a student and he was my teacher. In India, we have adopted a philosophy of eat, drink and be merry. I am talking not the present days, but the days about, I think 78, 79. So 30 years back. But if we see in the context of global economy today, it's vice versa. Professor David will agree with me that the entire financial meltdown, what we call today in the global economy, is only because of the consumption pattern which the US has evolved, which of course our ancestors used to talk that we believe that theory or that principle in India, but the US has practiced it the last 30 years. If you see the statistics from 1980 to 2006 or 7, it proves amply that it was really that sort of theory which has put the entire global economy in the reverse trend today. Anyhow, I am not going to deal with the principles of economics here, but what we learned in the university, what we learned in the field experience, and what we heard through the enlightened speakers like Professor David, and what we have practiced and what we have achieved, I am trying to put before you because all of you are very young, very dynamic, maybe the students or maybe the research scholars or maybe the teachers who can really contribute a lot in shaping the future of our country. The vocational training, the last question, which Professor took little time to understand, but I could understand very easily, is really a very dark area in our economy. Professor has quoted about Mahatma Gandhi, advocated the vocational training along with the formal schooling system. The government introduced, even from second 5-year plan, that is 1955, what they used to call the vocational branch or the vocational training center in the high schools. Subsequently, they introduced to the intermediate colleges also. But today, if you visit any of the high school or any of the intermediate college, in most of the places you will find that the classrooms which are meant for vocational training are locked. The vocational teachers are not recruited, not available at all. And the students, they never go to that side of the school or the college where the vocational training used to be provided or imparted to them. Coming to the institutes which are actually meant for 100% vocational training. The department which my department is dealing with, that Industrial Training Institute, you might have heard the name, ITA. After taking over charge in this department, I happened to visit one of the ITI about a year back in place called Vijayawada, which is most of you know, very urban area, and one of the biggest and oldest ITI in our state. That ITI has adopted a concept called Center of Excellence, a newly introduced concept by the central government, and they selected the sector that is automobile sector, because Vijayawada is full of automobiles as well as the workshops. When I went to see the center, you will be surprised to know that a center of excellence selected in the year 2007 under the new scheme of the present Prime Minister or the then Prime Minister of India, we were imparting training to the students in 1958 model of the ambassador car. Now you can imagine what type of technology, what type of vocational training, what type of skill development we are doing, and for what purpose. Soon after my visit to the ITI, I happened to have discussion with the industry partners, and I put only one question to them, including the hotel industry. I told, if you are the partners to our system of education in the ITI, what do you expect a student to acquire during the ITI days, the knowledge, the skill? And the very, very sort of pertinent answer, which came basically from the hotel industry, that we want the student to follow the instructions what we give after the employment. We don't need any skill development. We don't need any sort of acquisition of the skills by the student, because we know that the system is incompetent to do so. But at least you don't spoil the student, that tomorrow when he becomes our employee, he should not disobey our instructions. He should not refuse to learn what we want him to learn in the industry. That is the situation I am talking of 2007. What I would like to place before you, you are also going to be the managers of your industry or company. We have got a scheme called public-private partnership. That is, as of now, we have adopted for ITIs. Very soon we are going to adopt for polytechnics and other institutions of vocational training. We want that you must fully involve as an industry partner. Industry is only for the nomenclature sake, but even if you are heading one hotel or any other such kind of enterprise, you can be the chairman of the committee, you can be the industry partner. Not only fully involved in the institute building, but try to give some innovative ideas, as Professor David has said. Let's try with the low skill equilibrium initially, because in our country, where we have got a very sizable population to be trained, almost touching somewhere around 550 million people, we cannot ignore the bottom of the skill, that is the high school dropouts, maybe high school pass or intermediate pass candidates. And that being the case, all the vocational training institutes as of now, which are producing in the entire country what they say about 2.57 million trained or skilled manpower every year. is not adequate. Because one side the figure is 550 billion, other side our output, our outturn is only 2.57 million per annum. To match that one, each industry, each enterprise, each institution has to take up the skilling of the persons on a very large scale. And of course, we cannot ignore the technology. It has to be with the latest technology. It has to be in the context of changing economic scenario, and it has to be relevant and comprehensible by the people to whom you are designing such training programs. Secondly, what has been mentioned by Professor David, and which I fully support, that this LSC can stabilized only with reference to the two factors in our economy. It has to be, no doubt, environmental friendly, and it has to be having complete or full support of the funding. Funding doesn't mean that it has to come entirely from the government or the government exchequer, but funding can be through the contribution of the individuals, through the contribution of the society, through the contribution of the what we call the NGOs, civil society organizations, etc. But one very innovative idea, a scheme which has been introduced recently and we are progressing very well, perhaps can make this system of skill development or skill training more stable and more acceptable than in the earlier form of institutional arrangements. And that's what I think Professor has also mentioned, and I would like to little bit highlight on that issue. That's the modular employable skills. Now, modular employable skills is such a unique program that even you as a student, as a research scholar, simultaneously you can undergo a particular type of training. Your skill